All right, weekly Tanya Summary Shiur, week 7. We're doing Prakim Yud Zayin through Yud, and without any further ado, let us start. So, Parak Yud Zayin starts off by saying, going back to something the Alter Rebbe said at the beginning of Tanya, that Tanya is to explain the meaning of the pasuk Kikari v'lecha davar me'ed b'fichol v'vavcha la'asei, that the matter of loving Hashem, that is very close to you in your mouth and in your heart to do it. So the Alter Rebbe says we need to understand this pasuk. What does it mean that it's close to you? So the Alter Rebbe says, actually, based on what we explained in Parak Zayin, that a Beinoni, practically speaking, is able to influence themselves to such an extent that while they might not be completely godly, really they're actually quite physical. But ultimately, they're only doing mitzvahs. They're not doing averis. So even though they're still really a 50-50 split of godliness versus physicality, and really the natural state should be that they fall into physicality, but Hashem helps them out, and ultimately they're able to inspire themselves to do only mitzvahs. So the Alter Rebbe says, based on this, we can now understand the pasuk, because he says that when it says this thing that's given that's very close, what's the very close thing? The very close thing is la seisei. It's a love that's given over la seisei. Enough love that you should, at the end of the day, practically speaking, do mitzvahs. It's not saying that you need to have this great all-encompassing love. I mean, it's good to have great all-encompassing love for Hashem, but it's saying that you get to appreciate Hashem enough that you're practically driven to Ma'aseh. That's what's close to you. Now the Alter Rebbe says this comes about through contemplation of godly matters. This is going to be a big theme for the rest of the first book of Tanya, and not dafka to start getting into all of the details over here. But the Alter Rebbe says these things work for a tzaddik and they work for a Beinoni, about whom it could be said that they have a nefesh alikis that's very present and very active in their mind, and it might not be as present and active in their heart, but as long as it's giving input, it's able to override the heart. The Alter Rebbe says this is not the case with Rishoyim. Rishoyim, it says about Rishoyim that their hearts are not in their domain, that they have a heart, and the heart is very passionate, and the passion doesn't really belong to them. So for these people, the Alter Rebbe says that the way that they inspire this love, because again, we're saying Moshe Rabbeinu is telling all of the Yidden, and all of the Yidden includes even Rishoyim, and it's a nitzchistic lesson, it's an eternal lesson for all generations, it's written in Torah. So ultimately, it's something that applies for everyone. The Alter Rebbe says very simple. What you need to do, I mean, it's easier said than done, but what you need to do is you need to do tshuva, you need to break the heart. Break the heart, you break the passion, the domain of the heart, and then suddenly you're able to express the love that's there. Now, not to get too far ahead, this is the end of Parak Yud Zayin in the summary. Then the Alter Rebbe says, now we need to understand what the word very in the pasuk Kikari v'lecha davar me'ed, that the thing is very close to you. We need to understand what's the very. How is it very close? And as it happens with this explanation, we're also going to get an appreciation of why Rishoyim, all that they're lacking is a little bit of tshuva for them to start serving Hashem in this way. So the Alter Rebbe says that the Avos made themselves into a merkava for godliness. They were completely, like the same way that a chariot is given over to the charioteer, they were completely given over to godliness. Every twinge that they made, every glance, every tweak, everything was given over to godliness. And because they were so given over to godliness in every single capacity, Hashem said that almost as a schus, their descendants are all going to have a certain aspect of their soul. It's not that everyone has the literal soul of Avraham Avinu or Yitzchak or Yaakov, but rather that everyone has some aspect of it. Some meaningful part is given over to every one of the descendants of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, that is to say, to Klal Yisrael. Now, every aspect of the soul, even though it isn't the complete soul, but it's a part of the whole. So every Jew has a part of the soul of Avraham, Yitzchak, or Yaakov. Now, this doesn't mean that every person is a complete mirror image of Avraham, Yitzchak, or Yaakov, or something like that. Everyone is their own individual. But the fact that they have this part means that there's some inherent part of them that is inclined to serving God. And it's a part of them which exists above what they know, above what they understand, above their emotions. It's something that just exists as a part of them. And that's why the Alter Rebbe explains this is the reason why some Jews, or most Jews, will go on Mesiras Nefesh for Yiddishkeit, even if they don't have nearly a complete understanding of Yiddishkeit. Some people haven't, learned the entire Tanya. Some people haven't learned the entire Rambam or the entire Shas. I would say most people haven't learned the entire Shas, even most from a Yidden. And yeah, when push comes to shove, so many Yidden have died on Mesiras Nefesh, not because they thought they necessarily stood to gain something. It could be because of that, but at the same time, most people probably didn't even know what's written about Elam Haba to the fullest extent, and whatever a good reward is, practically speaking, most people appreciate good on hand now in this world, and to say that they would give their lives for some kind of theoretical, futuristic reward in a world that they don't understand doesn't really make a lot of sense. But the Alter Rebbe says that with this we could properly understand why they would. It's because they have a part of themselves. We all have a part of ourselves that's given over to godliness in a way that exists above reasoning. It exists above understanding. It's just a part of who we are. Now this is really the end of Parak Yud Ches. I just wanted to add in one more point that the Alter Rebbe said that I kind of glossed over in the course of things. That with this we could also understand why sometimes you have very lofty souls that are born to not such lofty parents, even if the parents, they live their lives without a lot of Kedusha or without a lot of holiness or Tara, but it's still completely possible for a very lofty soul to come down to such parents, because ultimately every soul has a part of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov in that soul. So it's really something to appreciate, that it doesn't matter where you're coming from as long as you're a Jew. And also converts are added onto the Jewish nation, and Avram Avinu is the father of all converts. So ultimately every Jew has this very great potential, and just I think that point itself is worth mentioning, even if it doesn't necessarily belong exactly in a kitzur. Anyhow, onwards to Parak Yud Tes, and in Parak Yud Tes, the Alter Rebbe continues elaborating on the idea of a soul and that it has this power. What does it mean? So the Alter Rebbe starts getting into details about the soul, and it says in the pasuk, Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, that the candle of God is the soul of man. And the Alter Rebbe says, what does this mean? So he says one facet of the explanation of this pasuk is that the same way that a fire is constantly looking to go higher, fire is constantly flickering, it's jumping, it's leaping, and it wants to rise up. Now, I don't know how much the fire knows, but the fire should know that if it leaves the wick, then it'll extinguish. It needs to have a source of fuel, it needs to have something to hold on to, and yet the fire is constantly trying to reach up. To the fire, it doesn't matter if it makes sense or not. The fire just wants to reach higher, wants to reach a state of equilibrium, what's very often called the source of fire. A place where where the density, in a physical sense, where the density of fire is equal to what's around it. And what this means for us practically is that the soul wants to be at an equilibrium. It wants to be completely surrounded by godliness. It doesn't want to be sunken into the very physical, very coarse world. The Alter Rebbe says that Klippa is the coarseness. Klippa is the physical, what's holding the neshama back. And the Alter Rebbe says it could even come to a point sometimes where the physical is able to cover over the spiritual to an extent where a person, not necessarily are they going to do Torah and mitzvahs, even though that's really how a soul connects to godliness, even though that's how a soul finds its equilibrium. But sometimes the Klippa is just covering over so much that the fire doesn't have anywhere to go, and it doesn't know which direction to head in order to try to find this equilibrium. So the Alter Rebbe says that nevertheless, we can see an expression of this still whenever a person is under the impression that something will get in the way of them connecting with Hashem. A Yid will never allow that thing to happen. Whatever input they're able to give, they'll try to stop it from happening. Yidden for thousands of years, again, went on Mesiras Nefesh. And the reason why, even though people will do Averis right, left, and center, even Averis that are Chayav Karis and Averis that are Chayav Misa, it doesn't matter. People will do it. It's Geshmak. This is life. But ultimately, if it's something that they appreciate, wait a second, this is Taka getting in the way of me and Hashem, people will reject it to the ultimate degree. And the Alter Rebbe explains the reason why is because while you may be able to smother a fire with many layers, if you ultimately try to take a powerful enough fire and you try to snuff it out directly, it just doesn't work. It'll melt whatever's in the way. And this fire of the neshama works like that. That maybe if it gets covered with coarseness enough, it'll end up doing, leaving the mushal for a second. If the neshama will end up in being invested in a body that does a various. But ultimately, if you try to reach at something that's the core, something that really, that's touching the neshama, touching the connection that exists between neshama and godliness, the neshama will always flare up. It'll do whatever it can to try to escape in order to not be disconnected for even a moment. that concludes chapter 19, or at least a summary of it. And if I'm not mistaken, next week we're going to be talking a little bit about Hishtalshalos and Tzimtzum, Mir Hashem, for next week.